Okay, Dad, today is Monday, August 5th, and there's a lot to talk about. So I don't even know where we want to begin. We got Venezuela, obviously the Iran Israel situation is everyone's on pins and needles waiting for the strike. The
Uh,
UK is burning. We got the economy tanking. There's a
yeah,
lot
well,
happening. Where
I
do
don't,
you
I
want
don't
to?
really have it. I don't have anything to say about the economy, or I've just seen headlines, um,
Yeah, okay.
but
Well,
or the riots for that matter. But yeah, Venezuela definitely, Iran definitely, Ukraine definitely.
okay. Well, maybe we can hit all three if we have time.
Okay,
I know everybody wants to hear about Israel and Iran, but everybody's just kind of waiting for what's happening. So maybe we'll hold on that until towards the end. We can maybe cover some of the other things. We can start with
okay,
Venezuela. I don't know a whole lot about this, to be honest. I just know that there's elections. Maduro won, but then the U.S. said no, and then Elon Musk got involved and tweeted that saying that the opposition party won. So what's happening? Can you just break it down from the
yeah,
beginning?
okay. Well, yeah. First, I'll just say, a disclaimer. Well, I don't know a whole lot about Venezuela. It's not a place that I've studied, for a long period of time. I can say that definitely about Israel. I've been following developments in Israel, Palestine for decades, and been following the events in Ukraine assiduously, hour after hour ever since war broke out about 2.5 years ago. So I feel like, yeah, I'm on very solid ground when I'm talking about those places. But Venezuela is new territory for me. But it's not that I don't know anything about it. I just want to, yeah, to more or less repeat what you said. There were elections held recently, and the winner, according to the official tally, there was Maduro, who was the incumbent. The I guess it was Gonzalez was supported by the U.S. and the West, by the usual suspects, and Gonzalez did not accept the results, and the U.S. and its Western allies or vassals, whatever you want to call them, yeah, immediately said that these results are tainted. Clearly, they're false. Yeah, Gonzalez was the winner. Um, yeah, I think the only evidence that I've heard them put, to um, support that claim is that well, there was some exit polls held, and then some polling done prior to the election, which indicated to them anyway that the opposition, that is Gonzalez, was going to win. Maybe win by a good 5 or 10% point, 5 or 10%, and but it turned out the other way around. Now, I don't know enough. Let's see. On the one hand, this sounds suspiciously like a color revolution. It looks like the color revolution playbook, right? Which you've seen in many countries in Eastern Europe and other parts of the world. Um, you hold an election, you don't like the results, and then you start having protests, and immediately the U.S. and other countries, associated with the U.S. start to crank up the organs of propaganda and declare, yeah, that the true winner and the legitimate president is this person, who's obviously pro-Western, and the other person is clearly um, he's clearly illegitimate, right? And should not be recognized by anyone. It happens again and again. We've seen it maybe dozens of times. So it makes you wonder, right? It seems a
Mm,
little bit too familiar, and how can they really know in any case? They could have their suspicions, but they immediately declare they know who the winner is. Have they been counting the ballots? How can they really know? Who conducted
right.
these exit polls? I don't know who conducted the exit polls, but some of the polls that were done prior to the election were conducted by groups very Western oriented groups that have done similar things in previous color revolutions. So I think there's a strong reason to be very suspicious of the Western claims. Um, but it's possible they cheated. I don't know enough about Maduro. But one thing I think I want to point out is that no matter what happens, it seems clear that the U.S. has U.S. and again, its Western vassals clearly intervened in this election. Because what are they doing? They have been applying the screws to the Venezuelan economy for years, right? Starting in 2018, they imposed severe economic sanctions, very severe, that went right to the heart of their economy, which is oil. That has caused billions of dollars of losses. And they made it clear it's because the wrong person is in charge, Maduro. They don't consider him legitimate. He's got to go. And then one of their appointed or approved candidates, if that a candidate gets elected like Gonzalez, then they'll um, end the sanctions, right? Well, that's just some kind of blackmail. So what kind of, even if the other side actually did win, you say, well, this is really not a fair election. We have the world's greatest power holding a gun to the head of these voters, figuratively speaking. Um, so that's one thing I just wanted to point out. And then, yeah, the other thing is the sanctions themselves. This was a poor country to begin with. If you go back, I think it was like in the early 2000s, it was, not prosperous, but under Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, a lot of people were lifted out of extreme poverty. And that was a time when oil prices were high. And then oil prices crashed and they began to experience these very severe economic problems. I mean, that happens with an economy that relies too much on oil or some other natural resource. Economists actually call that a resource curse. There's a temptation to really kind of distort your economy and because resource prices tend to fluctuate rather wildly. And when you're riding high, you make a lot of decisions as though that was normal, but it's not. There are good times and there are bad times, and if you don't prepare for the bad times, you really suffer. And I think one criticism that clearly could be fairly made of Hugo Chavez is that he didn't prepare for the bad times, for the low oil prices. But so anyway, that happened, the crash, there were a lot of people who went back into severe poverty. But then on top of that, the U.S. applied very severe sanctions. I know we're talking about billions of dollars, and they seized billions of dollars. They, imposed sanctions on oil exports. They seized their very large gas station. If I know you're familiar with it, Citgo, which is quite, common in the state of Tennessee and other states of the U.S. They quite simply took that from the Venezuelan government and handed it over to Juan Guaido, who they had anointed the true president.
I remember
This is,
that guy.
yeah, right. So anyway, I mean, it was just outright theft, and it was done to a poor country. And then you have this country is pushed deeper into poverty, and then you say, well, look what this terrible government's done. Now we got to save them. But look, it's hard to say, okay, I'm sure they made some bad economic decisions, but you're piling these sanctions and stealing their money on top of it. It's just like you're not in a position to start lecturing them and, telling them, how they should run their country because you're doing everything you can to make them miserable. Um,
Okay, well,
I,
here's
I, I,
my
yeah, go ahead.
my question. My question is just why? What does the U.S. have against Maduro so much?
Well,
Why
I
can't we
think,
work with it? Why
yeah,
do we just let them do what they want to do and we just trade with them normally?
right, right. The superficial answer that you would get on TV, mainstream TV, is that we're just concerned about the rights of the people of Venezuela. That they've been deprived of their votes have been stolen from them or something like that, right? Um, of course, this is nonsense because we're very selective about where countries where we're concerned about human rights and democracy. There's really virtually no concern in Saudi Arabia, but then we're hyper concerned in Iran, for example. So it just shows you it's not
Hmm.
really about that. That's the excuse that's always given. I think that it comes down to geopolitics and natural resources. It's just that Venezuela has been friendly with the enemies of the United States. Russia and Iran has a foreign policy that is clearly anti-U.S. imperialist. So that's part of it. And the other part is that they have tremendous oil resources. So I mean, it's a very important country within the Western Hemisphere for that reason. If for no other.
Does the U.S. has some impressive oil reserves, right? Is it just the problem that we're not extracting it because of our environmental regulatory laws? Or can we be pretty energy dependent, or do we always rely on, countries like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela for
Yeah,
oil?
well,
Is that
Right. That's a technical question that I don't really have the answer to. I remember it was not too long ago that the U.S. was like going back to the 1990s. The U.S. was, and earlier, the U.S. was a major importer of oil. That seemed to be the way it was going to be going way, way back. You think about Texas in the early days of the automobile. Yeah, we were completely energy independent. We produced more than enough for ourselves. But sometime, I don't know exactly where it happened, we began to import oil, clearly in the 60s or maybe earlier. And that seemed to be the trend. But then with new technologies, namely fracking, we began to extract more oil from our own oil fields here in the U.S. and became a net exporter. Now, I maybe that's coming up to an end. It's a technical question that I just don't know the answer to, but that's something worth looking into.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I'm just wondering. Like, I mean, it's not like Venezuela isn't selling their oil to us, right? I
Well,
mean,
they were, yeah,
it did.
that's right.
So I don't understand why we were so angry. It's not like they were saying we're not going to sell to you. Is it just because they were
Yeah.
selling to some other people we didn't like?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
I think
the
it's the geopolitics. We don't. Here's a country. Well, one thing is, okay, it's poor, but it has the potential to be rich because it's so oil rich, right? And its geopolitical orientation is unacceptable to us. I mean, again, you pointed out in the past, like, yeah, well,
our,
who cares? We can live with this, but our again, our hegemons just can't. We the people who run this country believe in American global hegemony, and they see
so
Venezuela as a potential threat.
there's got to be. Is there some real like anti-American rhetoric coming out of Venezuela? I mean, probably because of the sanctions, but
Well, yeah,
prior to
yeah,
that,
yes, sir. And I think prior to
the
that, there was too. Hugo Chavez was a real kind of fiery populist, and there's
mhm.
a strong tradition in Latin America, anti-Yankee rhetoric, and more than that, right? So this is something that has, we still have Cuba, which is still in the revolutionary leftist camp, but a lot of those other countries have drifted away. It seemed like a greater threat decades ago, but yeah, again, there's this obsession
So the only
with,
reason we're
especially with,
trying to,
yeah, with an obsession with
so the only
keeping
reason we're trying to,
America, keeping the Americas, North America and South America. This is our part of the world, right? Especially around the Caribbean, the Monroe Doctrine. That we don't want to have um, any rival power, any anybody that's not allied with us. We just have very little tolerance. We have little tolerance for on the other side of the world, right? But the tolerance is even less tolerance for that kind of thing on our side of the world, and especially with in the Mediterranean area. Now, I think it's absurd. It's an obsession that's gone too far, but it's clearly there.
are you really just saying that really the only crime Venezuela committed is that it's not subservient to the United States, that
Yeah.
the
Well, I mean,
government isn't like,
well,
okay,
that's a
we'll
crime that
do everything the
every,
US says?
yeah, yeah. Basically, I mean, that's a crime that all of the enemies, the
How,
axis of evil, look, Iran, Russia, that's the crime that they committed. It wasn't, it's just sorry, but the idea that we're actually concerned about authoritarianism or a lack of democracy, you just look at the countries that we support. It's absolutely meaningless. It doesn't make a bit of sense because you can
right.
find
And
actually on those
well,
measures they actually do quite well compared to a lot of other countries in the region. It's just that they're not subordinate to us.
right.
They're not part of the team.
And then right, and when you're saying they're not subordinate to us, it's not like they're our enemies. They're not actively trying to hurt us. We're
Right.
making them enemies
Right.
because they're not subordinate. We end up sanctioning them, and we end up
Right.
hurting them. But they actually pose no threat to the United States, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
this is the more I kind of understand the world and how the U.S. operates in it. It's just such an asinine foreign policy the United States has. It's so self-destructive. It's just like we really are the bully. You got to
Uh-huh.
give me some of your school lunch constantly, and if not, I'm gonna beat you up. That's kind of our It feels like the way
Yeah,
we operate.
right.
And even now that we're come to this point where we basically pushed and formed the creation of BRICS Plus and a new financial system that doesn't rely on the dollar because of everything we're doing, we're still doubling down on the
Right.
same bad decisions to expedite our own demise. And it just, I guess the problem is you have so many people in the foreign policy deep state that this is their job is they're working like, oh, what do we do color revolutions, we got to make sure everybody's supported, and they just seem to be on autopilot
Yeah.
moving forward on this path, even though nobody steps back like, hey, wait a minute, guys, what's
This
our
isn't
end
working.
goal? To make
Yeah.
America more prosperous,
Right. Right.
make America safer? Well, this isn't working. We're throwing away millions of dollars, billions of trillions of dollars, and the world's hating us the more we do it. Maybe we should kind of rework our, sort of our company values or whatever it is you want to talk about as
Yeah.
here at this institution.
Right.
But that's not possible. There is no way to reform it.
Yeah.
At least I
No,
don't think so,
there,
right?
yeah, there doesn't seem to
Like,
be, there's no signs of any sort of awareness or, awakening within the foreign policy elite in this country at this time. Yeah, they're doubling down. It's
well,
more of the
well,
same.
no, right. So Elon Musk, he's clearly a smart guy. He builds rocket ships. He wants to
Yeah.
colonize Mars. And, I appreciate a
Yeah.
lot of things he did, buying Twitter. He's eccentric. Why would this guy say automatically tweet support that for Gonzalez and start meddling in the election of, it just doesn't seem like a smart thing to do. Like how do you know Elon Musk?
Right, right,
well,
right. Yeah,
well, why would he tweet that? Why,
right. You
and
might
just,
have reasons, legitimate reasons to be suspicious, but I don't see how he could know, that the election was stolen. They made these decisions immediately, like 24 hours afterwards. This is, or even sooner. This, the moment that the results were announced. Yeah, well, maybe part of it is that he he's very much pro-capitalist. He himself is sort of an uber capitalist, right? And it's true, that
Mhm.
that Venezuela is a socialist country and represents, a completely different system that he finds just very, unacceptable, unsavory. But that doesn't seem like a reason to try to overthrow it. We live in a big world, and we can let different countries experiment with different systems, and if it's a failure of a system, everybody will see it.
Right.
It's just, and eventually they'll change course themselves. The way to make sure that they don't change course is that you continually try to meddle from the outside. That just makes, certainly many Venezuelans simply very resentful. And some of them, interestingly enough, I heard like one of the parties that announced that they agreed with the results of Maduro, that the government reported. It was actually a pro-capitalist party, anti-socialist, but they also believe in sovereignty. In other words, they're against foreign meddling. And that seems to me, it's just the only honorable sort of position. You say that, okay, yeah, maybe I don't like this guy's policies, but I'm not going to let the U.S. dictate who's the winner and who's the loser. I'm not going to let dictate the U.S. Blackmail us through economic sanctions to choose a candidate of their choosing. That's just not acceptable. You just got to get out and let us work this out ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of course. That's such a reasonable, common sense approach. You don't go into somebody else's house and tell them how to, raise their kids or do whatever and arrange their furniture. It's, you have to
yeah,
be respectful.
right. You might say,
But
look in
we
through the
clearly don't
window and say,
understand that.
yeah, boy, that place looks like a mess. But hey, yeah, you don't knock on the door and tell them what to do.
Right. Yeah, I think it's just. I think you're right. I think it's just Elon Musk as a capitalist views, and so many people that are on that capitalist camp are, very anti-socialist, anti-communist because they've seen the horrors that socialism and communism has brought upon the world, or they know the history of it. Not it. It is not a smart form of governance, and we can go into it. But I totally agree. We shouldn't be getting involved in that. But I think that's just that focus is like we have to get rid of the scourge of communism. It's so evil that we need to do
Yeah,
whatever it is in our power to prevent it, or else that country will be destroyed. I think that's the mindset. But I think people also have to realize that things aren't black and white. The perfect example of this is China. People, China, they're like, oh, the Communist Party of China. There's an example of a communist country. It's not a communist country. You go there, it's a very capitalist country. It's a very prosperous country. It's a very well-run, efficient country. I'm speaking as somebody that's lived there for 10 years. You also know China very well, speak the language. But that's the idea, is that people just sort of quickly add these labels, and that's always dangerous when people do that. Like, oh, we'll put this country in this bin with the bad countries. It's socialism, communism, and I think people need to realize that it's very complex. I mean, who can say that the U.S. is really a capitalist country now? I mean, you got to ask the government if you can wipe your butt now. It's ridiculous. We're becoming a crony capitalist country that is bought and paid for by different lobby groups, big pharma, and of course APAC.